My name is Biljana Stanko, and I'm Professor of Applied Studies at Novi Sad School of Business, Republic of Serbia. I will present to you the research entitled National Data Collection Contribution to Higher Education Students' Inclusion and Equity within the European Education Area. This research I prepared with my colleague, Professor Georgi Chuzovic. First of all, I will talk about the problem and subject of the research. The research problem refers to the analysis of the system and capacity for data collection in terms of the contribution to the implementation of the social dimension in the national strategies of higher education of EU member states and candidate countries in order to contribute higher education students' inclusion and equity. The research subject implies three data groups. First, administrative data on student characteristics. Second, administrative data on completion rates at the end of the first cycle and specific student characteristics. And third, administrative data on completion rates at the end of the first year of the first cycle. Aims of the research are comparison of national data collection systems efficiency, determination to the degree of system adoption of EU candidate countries to EU standards in a given context, and proposition of the guidelines for future system improvements and develop mechanism for identifying members of vulnerable, disadvantaged, and underrepresented groups based on the collected data. In order to develop effective higher education strategies, it is very important to continuously collect the mentioned data at national levels and adopt them to national legal frameworks, while ensuring international comparability. Now I will tell you something about the social dimension in higher education strategies in the European higher education area. The implementation of the social dimension in national higher education systems has become a very important issue over time, to which the European Union and the European higher education area have been paying even more attention in the last 2 decades. The definition of the social dimension in the European higher education area provided in 2007 by Treaty of London is the composition of the student body entering, participating in, and completing higher education at all levels should reflect the diversity of our populations. In 2020, the definition was enlarged, and the social dimension also encompasses the creation of inclusive environment in higher education that fosters equity, diversity, and is responsive to the needs of local communities. Inclusion and equity certainly stand out among the key values of the European Union. At the beginning of the 21st century, the application and respect to the principles of equality and inclusion in education became so very important topics. These are also the values that represent the essence of the social dimension within the actual European strategy for universities. The strategy of higher education must have a social dimension in its focus that will support equal opportunities for all students, starting from the moment of application and enrollment through the period of study and until the end of studies. Many previous studies have shown that within the European higher education area, there are inequalities in access to, progression to, and completion of higher education. National higher education strategies must be based on measures whose implementation in practice will affect the elimination of all forms of discrimination of students based on socioeconomic status, gender, race, religious commitment, belonging to vulnerable categories, and etc. Also, strategies must strive to ensure equal study conditions for all social group members. Now I will talk about data collection in higher education, which is the research problem in this study. Determining clear strategies for the implementation of the social dimension in the national frameworks of higher education and their application does not lead to appropriate effects if their benefits are not valorized in practice. Data collection plays a very important role in this context. However, if the collected data and the conclusions based on them are not applied to undertake corrections and improve the mentioned strategies, we also cannot talk about the realization of the expected benefits. Reliable and high quality data are prerequisites for improving the social dimension of national higher education strategies, and they are an excellent basis for the creation of adequate support programs for students from vulnerable groups. The data in this research was collected from secondary data source Juridic report published by the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. In the research sample, there are member states of the European Union and some candidate countries. And in further research, the following questions will be answered. Is administrative data collected at the national levels on student characteristics? Is data collected on degree completion rates at the end of the first cycle? Then, is this data linked to specific student characteristics? And in the end, is data collected on completion rates at the end of the first year of the first cycle? First research indicator is collection of administrative data on student characteristics. That is basic student characteristics like age, gender, sexual orientation, labor market status, non-standard entry qualifications, first generation, residing in a certain geographical area, then people with special educational needs, disability, ethnicity or race, migrant status or migrant background, then refugee status, religious affiliation, low socioeconomic status, family background, and other informations. We can see that almost all EU member states collect data on at least one and usually more characteristics of students. The exception is Slovakia, in which public authorities doesn't collect this data, given that its higher education strategy is under preparation. Among the EU candidate countries, Albania, North Macedonia, Serbia, and Turkey stand out as they collected this data, while in Montenegro and Bosnia and Herzegovina there is no administrative data collection by top-level public authorities on these student characteristics. Second research indicator is collection of administrative data and completion rates at the end of the first cycle and specific student characteristics. As we see, all countries can select on three groups. First is countries in which completion rate data at the end of the first cycle includes specific student characteristics. In the second group are countries in which completion rate data at the end of the first cycle doesn't include specific student characteristics. And in third group are countries with no completion rate data. We can conclude that completion rate data at the end of the first cycle, which includes specific student characteristics, are collected in most European Union member states. Exceptions are Italy, Cyprus, Latvia, and Ireland, where the relevant data is not collected at all. On the other hand, Lithuania, Slovenia, Bulgaria, and Greece stand out among the EU member states where the completion rate data at the end of the first cycle doesn't include specific student characteristic. In the case of candidate countries, the situation is very good since they all collect complete data, while only Bosnia and Albania collect only data on completion rate at the end of the first cycle, which doesn't include specific student characteristics. Third research indicator in this study is collection of data on completion rates at the end of the first year of the first cycle of higher education. The data presented in the table show an almost equal distribution among research countries. Half of the EU member states collect the data on the completion rates at the end of the first year of the first cycle of higher education, while the other half do not deal with it. The situation is the same among the candidate countries. Albania, North Macedonia, and Turkey collect this type of data, while in the remaining countries, the public authorities don't collect the data. Considering that the dropout rate is highest after the first year of the first cycle of higher education, it is concluded that the collection of this data would have multiple beneficial effects. Namely, very useful information would be obtained that would serve in the process of creating guidelines for solving problems in order to reduce the rate of dropping out of studies at national levels. At the end of this study, we can conclude that research countries that participate in the Euro-Student project collect significantly more administrative data on student characteristics than others. Countries that don't participate in the Euro-Student project are Belgium, Bulgaria, Greece, Cyprus, Latvia, Spain, Slovakia, and all candidate countries. Euro-Student project collects and analyzes comparable data on the social dimension on European higher education. Taking into account all the research criteria as well as the variety and number of basic data on student characteristics, it is concluded that half of the EU member states achieve exceptional results. The leading countries are Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands, France, Poland, Czech Republic, as well as Hungary and Romania. The candidate countries of the European Union, Albania, Turkey, and North Macedonia, are also in a very good position in the research context. Serbia meets some of the research criteria, while Bosnia doesn't meet any of them. The collection of data within all research groups would significantly contribute to the improvement of the social dimension within national higher education strategies, which would lead to greater representation of inclusion and equity in higher education of both member and candidate countries of the European Union. Thank you for your attention. Please contact us for more information.